David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Well, it's finally here. It's been so long, and yet the last 4 years, in a sense, have flown by. It's election day, and I could say many different things today. And if I said anything targeted at affecting how or whether you vote, it would likely be too late because most people have already voted with early voting and absentee ballots. And by the time today's show goes out, my guess is something like 95% will have already voted, just remaining with the last few to vote in person in the second half of today. And the reality is that at this point, this election has been decided. We won't know the results until the ballots are counted. Hopefully, every single ballot will be counted. That's an entire other issue that we've been dealing with this election. But this is one of the largest inflection points, not just in American, but in global politics that I've lived through, and certainly the biggest inflection point that I've covered since starting the David Pakman Show years and years ago. It is not just the presidency that is up for grabs tonight. Yes, in a literal sense, it is also the Senate. We don't know whether Republicans will retain control or not. It is also the House of Representatives, although Democrats are not just expected to retain control there, but even to expand the Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. But it is really, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but and I'm not, but it sounds like hyperbolic language. The next 10 to 20 years of American politics and global politics, I believe, are tied up in the results today that we will start to get tonight. The future of the United States as either part of the solution or part of the problem on climate depends on whether Donald Trump gets reelected today and whether Democrats take the Senate today. The future of the American reputation, and by extension, the experience that all of us have in the world, both when we are in the United States and when we travel elsewhere, that is at stake today. And also at stake today is whether we start to disassemble this mind virus that is Trumpism, or whether it is reinforced and perpetuated over the next 4 years, which would be an unconscionable disaster. Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified to be president of the United States at any time. But there could be no worse time for such an unqualified and incompetent president than right now. We've been faced with a 100-year global pandemic. Any other American president from the last 100 years would have better handled this pandemic. And in fact, I would suggest that just about any thinking person would have better handled this pandemic by stepping aside and saying, I know enough to know when I don't know, and I'm going to let the experts handle this. It's almost as if saying nothing and just saying I'm going to let other people handle it would have been better. And in fact, it would have been better. And Donald Trump deserves to be powerfully repudiated and removed because of his mishandling of the pandemic. We are rapidly approaching a record hurricane season caused by many things, one component of which is believed to be warmer oceans, partially as a result of American and human activity on planet Earth. It is the United States as a polluter. It is humans as polluters. That is a factor in this potentially worse than ever hurricane season. And we have a president who has said climate change is a Chinese hoax meant to bolster the Chinese manufacturing industry. We have an economic crisis, which will likely get worse before it gets better, with the third spike of coronavirus coming in the United States. And we have a president who knows nothing about economics, who called his later to be indicted national security advisor in the middle of the night to say, hey, is a strong dollar good or bad for the United States? That's who is handling the economic situation. We've had Great Depression-like unemployment numbers, GDP declines that even with the partial recovery of the third quarter leave us 8% shy of where we were at the start of the pandemic. 8% when you talk about GDP is a monstrous number. And we have a global community that started by laughing at us, but they're not laughing anymore. They are actually scared and pitying us. Listen to the foreign callers who called into my streams over the last week from Austria and Argentina and Australia and Spain, the United Kingdom, France, where else? Many, many places. They are scared of Trump and they fear for our futures. There would be no time in American history where Donald Trump would have been a good president. But there are times in American history where he could have been a more benign annoyance. There is no time in American history worse than right now for a president that has so weaponized the worst of the electorate and has so coalesced the most disgusting and violent instances of the American right wing. We tried the businessman president. Mitt Romney tried to do it, and the country very soundly said, no, we are reelecting Barack Obama. We now tried the businessman president, and it failed. Bad relationships need a clean end, and we can elect a different spouse today, for lack of a better term, and get a clean break on January 20th. You don't usually get the divorce and the new marriage on the same day, but we actually have that opportunity. I don't know who's ultimately going to win tonight. I don't know when we will ultimately know the results. And win or lose tonight, unless we fix our education, our culture, our financial systems, we aren't going to fix the problem of 30, 40, 50, 60 million people who not only voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago, but after seeing what he did for the last 4 years said, give me another 4. Okay? Trumpism does not disappear with Trump, whether he leaves in 2.5 months or 4 years and 2.5 months, if there are no consequences for the disgusting bad faith politics that we've seen this cycle. And in fact, if we don't deal with that, it could continue indefinitely. It could even be the downfall of the country. And I know many will say the United States could never have a downfall. It's too powerful. Every empire in the midst would say we will last forever. And just about every such empire did eventually fall. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Did you vote? Is the answer yes? If the answer is yes, then you've done your part. Did you tell people you should vote? And here's why you should vote for Joe Biden, or some combination, some version of that. We have to be okay knowing we've done what we can do. We ultimately don't control the fact that there are more than 60 million people in this country likely to vote to reelect Donald Trump. But for today, the focus is let's remove Trump. Let's take control of the Senate back. Let's open the door to starting to fix some of these issues. The counterpoint, the alternative is very ugly. And it's not clear to me that our democracy can withstand another 4 years of Trump. The country will withstand 4 more years of Trump. But will our democracy? And by the way, another 4 years of Trump opens the door to another Trump in 2024. It could be literally another Trump like Don Trump Jr. or Ivanka Trump. It could just be a Trump-like Republican. Both would be a disaster. So today is not about reminding you about bleach injections, drawing on hurricane maps with Sharpies like the one I have here, or lying again and again and again and again and again, as he has done for so long. This is merely about saying to the world, through the results that we will hopefully get today, enough of us realize the mistake that was made in 2016. Some of us made a mistake by actually voting for Trump. Not me, but some of us did. Some of us made a mistake by not voting at all. We realized that mistake, and we are taking not even step 1, but step 0.5 in the direction of fixing it. We're trying to get the ball back to try to put some points on the board in the next couple of years. I hope everyone in the audience has voted. We will be hopefully all together tonight as the results start to come in. We may not know everything by midnight tonight, but we will know quite a bit. And we will do our best to get you ready today for the next 24 hours. I will give you my final predictions. Reminder, I will be live tonight, starting with the first results at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We will be monitoring all of the different networks. We will have maps. We will have spreadsheets. We will have memes and songs and calls and the entire thing. So join me tonight on YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook. Let's now get into what I am predicting we will see tonight. Okay, it is time, a tradition as old as, I guess, this show, to give you my predicted electoral map. Now, I want to make two disclaimers here. One, I have no idea on this stuff. I thought Hillary would win in 2016. So this is, as the children say, merely for entertainment purposes. Number two, my approach was to be conservative. I understand that 538 and the Princeton Election Consortium and others are talking about 350 electoral votes for Joe Biden. I want to have a more conservative approach. I don't think in the end Biden will win Texas and Georgia. I would love to be wrong. I don't think he will. So I have a final electoral prediction of Biden 295, Trump 243. Yes, it's a smaller margin of victory than what websites are saying. I get that it could be a bigger Biden win. But I think that not only will Trump get Texas and Georgia in the end, I think Trump will get Florida as well. And maybe even Arizona, which is really close. Any one of those going to Biden would put him over 300 electoral votes, which would be a much larger victory. But this is sort of my best guess, assuming not everything goes Joe Biden's way. I've given North Carolina and Pennsylvania to Joe Biden. But in my map, again, a conservative map, Trump gets Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, and Iowa. Now, many of these are close. Texas is leaning red still, in my view, but it could go to Joe Biden. Same with Georgia, Iowa, Arizona, Florida. They really could go either way. Now, what is Donald Trump's most likely path to victory? Going by how 2016 went, Trump's most viable path to victory tonight would be likely getting Pennsylvania and something else. If Trump were to get Pennsylvania and Michigan, Trump wins with 279 electoral votes. If Trump gets Pennsylvania and North Carolina, but not Michigan, Trump wins with 278. If Trump gets both North Carolina and Michigan in addition to Pennsylvania, then he really wins. Now, this is something else I think is important to do. A more nuanced map divides the states into those that are solidly for one or the other candidates versus leaning one way or the other. And I think that this maybe is a relevant way to look. When you look at it in terms of solid and leaning, here I am marking Texas and Georgia as leaning Trump. I'm marking North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan as leaning Biden. Now, I know Michigan looks solid Biden, but if you look at the polling in Michigan, Trump has been gaining there. So I put it as leaning Biden in this map. If you think back to 2016 and the idea of the Wisconsin polls were wrong, the Michigan polls were wrong, the Pennsylvania polls were wrong, what was happening is that in that very last week, Donald Trump was gaining. He was growing his support in those states. And more than likely, if we had had 4 more days of polling, the polling would have caught up to public sentiment because public sentiment was changing rapidly in the last few days. That's not happening in Wisconsin right now. It is happening in Michigan, where Trump has been surging in Michigan, which is why in a more nuanced map, I put Michigan as leaning Biden rather than solid Biden. My assessment in this paradigm is that Biden for sure has 236 electoral votes. Trump for sure has 126. Those are the solid red and blue states. If Donald Trump gets all of his lean Trump states, he gets another 107. That puts Trump at 233. Trump doesn't have enough for 270 just with solid and leaning Trump states. What this means is Trump needs to turn something red that is not leaning that way. And that happened in 2016, although the circumstances are different. It would be some combination of Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. If Trump gets his solid Trump states and his leaning Trump states and some of the leaning Biden states, he can win. Joe Biden, on the other hand, with his rock bottom base of 237, needs to find 34 additional electoral votes in the lean Biden states. This is the important thing to understand. Either candidate can win. Biden doesn't need anything leaning Trump to win. Biden's going to get his 236. And then if he gets, I don't know, Michigan and Pennsylvania, he wins. That's 36. He needs 34 more. If he gets North Carolina and Pennsylvania, then Biden wins. And in this scenario, getting Nevada and Arizona alone, which I have as leaning Biden, would not be enough. That is my final prediction. Join me tonight going live just before the 7 p.m. Eastern results come in. I will be live on YouTube. I will be live on Twitch. I will be live on Facebook. In the meantime, I put a tweet up at D. Pacman asking for your electoral map predictions. Find that tweet at D. Pacman. Send me your predictions.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.
Today is the last day for the coupon code 2020 Now. I think you all know why. Grab a membership at joinpacman.com. Save 66%. 66%. Illegal, I hear, in some states. Just kidding. 2020 Now is the coupon code. Grab a membership. Countries around the world and the United States, including United States universities and police departments, and mayors and others are saying, be very careful in the United States in the aftermath of today's election. There are real, credible, serious preparations being made and warnings issued about violence that is expected as we learn the results of tonight's election. There are many scenarios in which I expect violence, and they are basically every scenario other than a blowout win by Joe Biden. If Joe Biden wins, but it's close, and Trump claims it was rigged or fraudulent, his followers will go crazy in the streets. I hate that this is likely, but it is. If Trump wins, but by a little bit, but he does so by stopping absentee ballot counting or through other tricks, I think we will see both sides in the streets, the left protesting for fair elections and Trumpists with their guns. If Trump claims victory, but then as absentee votes are counted, it starts to shift in the direction of Joe Biden, fired up lunatic Trumpists will be all over the streets, and it's going to be insane. And in fact, reporters from Reuters are being equipped as if they were covering a war. I will get to that a little bit later. It's not just me talking about it and others in the political space. George Washington University in Washington, D.C. told its students, stockpile food, stockpile medications as you normally would before a hurricane or a snowstorm, during which you might be home for several days. The Texas Army National Guard is prepared to deploy to the state's largest cities starting today. Police departments across the country are getting their officers ready for unrest or disruptions at the polls or after the polls. Businesses in many cities are boarding up ahead of Election Day to prevent glass-breaking incidents and maybe even worse. And stunningly, the state departments of other countries are telling their citizens, be very careful in the United States. Avoid the United States if you can. Check this out from the New Zealand Safe Travel Government Agency. They put out a statement saying, quote, New Zealanders in the United States are advised to avoid areas where political rallies or protest activity may occur. We recommend monitoring local media to stay up to date with developments and following any instructions issued by the local authorities, including curfews. If you find yourself in an area of protest, political activity, or civil unrest, you should leave the area if it is safe to do so, or remain indoors until the situation improves. They are providing New Zealanders with emergency contacts at embassies and consulates should the manure hit the fan and should they need help. The FBI has been briefed for contingencies depending on what goes down and how crazy things get. And by the way, to go back to New Zealand, if I lived in New Zealand, the last place I'd be thinking of going right now is the United States, short of an absolute emergency that required me to be in the United States. Australia issuing similar warnings, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade updating its advice saying there is a potential for violence in the coming days and weeks in the U.S. Australian travelers should stay away, saying also that the risk of terrorism has increased. Quote, the U.S. has a heightened risk of terrorist attacks. Terrorists may use vehicles, knives, homemade bombs, poisons, or toxins. Be alert, particularly in public places and at events. Violent crime is more common in the U.S. than in Australia, and gun crimes are possible in all areas. It's like coming into a war zone, the way these countries are warning their citizens about being in the United States tonight and later into this week. So in the end, here's my bottom line. Trump landslide win, expect large protests against Trump to collide with pro-Trump protesters celebrating. A Trump narrow win under questionable circumstances, expect absolutely unprecedented protests colliding with pro-Trump protesters. A Biden narrow win with Trump claiming foul play is the scariest scenario to me, where you will have the same Trump people out, but furious rather than happy, as they would be if Donald Trump were to win. And then again, a Biden landslide to me is the safest from a public unrest standpoint. I think a landslide win for Biden will so demoralize Trump and his followers that it's the most likely scenario in which they stay home and slowly over the next 4 years start to pretend they never really supported Donald Trump anyway. So those are the warnings. That's law enforcement. That's departments of state and the like. Let's now talk about what's going on for reporters planning to cover today's election. We have discussed the possibility of violence tonight and into the week. The White House is taking it seriously. They've built a new fence around the White House to protect Donald Trump. We'll talk about that later. Other countries, as I've already told you, taking it seriously, issuing travel warnings for their citizens who plan to be in the United States. I gave you the examples of Australia and New Zealand, and there are others. Colleges, I mentioned, George Washington University in D.C., telling students, plan like it's a snowstorm where you might not be able to or might not want to go out for days. Stockpile food, stockpile medication. Okay. Reporters for Reuters covering today's election will have protective gear in anticipation of unrest after a bunch of incidents in which journalists were targeted during summer protests. Reporters are being given flak jackets, helmets, and gas masks, plus, because we have a global pandemic, all of the PPE that you would need from the public health standpoint. Now, I want to be really clear about one thing. Tonight and this week, there is concern about armed Trumpists and generally about voters being out in large angry groups. And of course, that's a concern. But remember that during the anti-police brutality protests over the summer, most incidents of police, I'm getting ahead of myself. Most incidents of press being attacked, hit by rubber bullets, knocked down, punched, it was mostly coming at the hands of police and not protesters. That has been the big risk. The reason it might change tonight and this week is that Donald Trump has been very hostile to the media for 4 years now. He has been attacking the media as fake and phony and bad people and the enemy of the people. Trumpists often will verbally abuse reporters at Trump's rallies, many stories about that. And the idea is, if Trump narrowly loses and claims it was rigged, you are going to see the possibility of escalation into physical violence against the media, who many Trumpists, again, see as the enemy. That is legitimate, and I would be worried about that. But again, reminder, until now, the biggest risk to the press at protests has been police officers beating reporters, rubber bullets from armed officers hitting reporters, not danger from actual protesters. Now, can we step back for just a second and appreciate how insane this headline is? Reuters equipping journalists covering the U.S. election with flak jackets, helmets, and gas masks. Election reporters in the U.S. are having to be prepared like war correspondents. This is where America is in 2020. Other countries have offered to send us election monitors, and in fact, have sent them to 28 states. There are 11 states in the U.S. where such observers are banned, including many states in the south of the United States. I know 4 years is a long time. Change happens slowly. We have slowly become desensitized to these changes. Crazy things have become normalized, but step back for a moment and consider how insane it is that reporters need protective gear to cover a U.S. election because of the threat of violence. As the president has said, he will go to courts to try to get mail-in ballots thrown out won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power, while saying if he loses, he may leave the country like a deposed authoritarian dictator. Trump wants to be afraid of some non-existent hypothetical Biden's America. But look at Trump's America right now. Trump at his rallies continues to say, if you vote for Biden, it's a vote for anarchy, or anarchy, as he says. If you vote for Biden, it's a vote for low water pressure and no heating in the winter, no cooling in the summer, having to flush your toilet 10 or 15 times, the end of the suburb, all of this different stuff. Trump has been painting a completely dystopian picture if Joe Biden were to win. But remember, Donald Trump is president now. Look at the list of things that are happening now that many of us would never, ever, ever have imagined would have been what the United States is like. If I, and again, to frame this, go back to November 9th of 2016, the day after the election. If I had told you 4 years from now, this laundry list of things will be happening in the United States, I don't think any of you would have believed it. Very, very few of you would have believed it. That is where we are today. Let's desensitize. Let's resensitize ourselves to the insanity of this. And let's hope that tonight we see the right results. I hope you'll join me. I will be live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook starting just shy of 7 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you're also following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
One of my top priorities over the next 24 to 96 hours is the safety of everybody in our audience, of people all over the United States, as there is a lot of unrest expected in the U.S. And in fact, police departments across the country, as well as D.C. police, are expecting protests and unrest. We've seen police departments scale up the availability of crowd suppression tools. We've seen businesses board up windows in many parts of the country. I've talked already about some of the advice from universities, from travel departments under the Departments of State in other countries like New Zealand and Australia, etc. But it is also Donald Trump who will be barricading himself behind a massive new non-scalable fence today at the White House. CNN and NBC News are now reporting that a supposedly non-scalable fence will be placed around the White House in time for the start of election results tonight. These will be similar barriers to those that went up around the White House in June during the police brutality protests. ICE officers are being put on standby. Customs and Border Protection is issuing extra training on crowd control. National Guard troops are on standby. And remember that originally Donald Trump was planning this big election night party at his Washington, D.C. hotel. Why not make some money by hiring his own business to host the party? We learned yesterday and talked about it on yesterday's bonus show that party has been canceled. And instead, Donald Trump is going to be hunkering down at the White House, where he will reportedly hold an indoor election night party. But of course, the suspicion really is twofold. On the one hand, the big party at the hotel maybe has been canceled because the Trump campaign is no longer expecting a win, or at least maybe no longer expects a credible, definitive win tonight, as more votes will remain to be counted. But number two, in addition to that, the security concerns make it preferable to keep Donald Trump at the White House behind a series of concentric fences. And the suspicion, of course, is that Donald Trump, from his White House bunker behind a new fence, will claim victory tonight, even if there is no actual victory visible in the data that we have by midnight tonight. And then in will come Donald Trump's lawyers, and they will try to stop the counting of absentee ballots not yet received by midnight tonight. You don't have to take my word for it. Here is Donald Trump himself saying this is what he plans to do.
Because it can only lead to one thing, and that's very bad. You know what that thing is. I think it's a very dangerous, terrible thing. And I think it's terrible when we can't know the results of an election the night of the election in a modern day age of computer. I think it's a terrible thing. And I happen to think it was a terrible decision for our country made by the Supreme Court. I think it was a terrible decision for our country, and I think it's a very dangerous decision because you're going to have one or two or three states, depending on how it ends up, where they're tabulating ballots, and the rest of the world is waiting to find out. And I think there's great danger to it, and I think a lot of fraud and misuse can take place. I think it's a terrible decision by the Supreme Court, a terrible decision. Now, I don't know if that's going to be changed because we're going to go in the night of, as soon as that election's over, we're going in with our lawyers. But we don't want to have Pennsylvania where you have a political governor, a very partisan guy.
So there it is. I mean, no need to wonder about what the plan is. We just need to be ready. And I hope Biden's lawyers are ready. Now, at this point, I wouldn't even be shocked if Donald Trump declares victory before all the votes are counted. I wouldn't be shocked if Trump undermines the credibility of the results or says Joe Biden couldn't possibly have won if that's indeed what happens. But we are looking now, in all seriousness, at major nationwide protests if Donald Trump tries funny business. And if courts start going along with it, we are going to see mass gatherings, the likes of which this country has not seen for a long time. That doesn't mean Trump will fail to use the courts to steal the election. That's still a concern, which we have to hope Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are ready for and prepared to fight back against. If we have a simple election and Donald Trump just loses, it will be a very different type of chaos. And we may see armed right-wingers maybe operating under the umbrella of being a so-called militia, and that's very scary. But the optics of Trump putting up a fence and barricading himself at the White House is both metaphorical for what many of us believe he will try to do if he loses tonight, hold on to power, but it is also very similar to the behavior we've seen from authoritarian dictators around the world close to the end of their reigns. Trump has said, I may leave the country if I lose. Trump said to, I think it was Michigan last night, I will never come back to Michigan if I lose. Trump is going to stay at the White House and put new fencing around him. Trump is going to try to use the courts to retain power. These are the actions of authoritarian dictators the world over the last 100+ years. Let's just hope that this is the beginning of the end rather than the halfway point in Donald Trump's reign. That would be exhausting. That would be exhausting if that were to be the case. If we're only halfway through right now, that is some very ugly stuff. I'm not going to do too much on Donald Trump's recent interviews, but there is one interview that I think deserves some discussion. Donald Trump this morning was very late to what could be his last Fox News interview as a non-lame duck president. Trump did a handful of rallies yesterday and didn't make it back to the White House until very late. He was expected on Fox News bright and early this morning on Fox and Friends. He just didn't appear on time. The belief is he slept through it. Eventually, Trump called in 40 minutes late or something like that. Sounded terrible. But more importantly, his closing message was a disgusting and humiliating one. Take a look at some of these clips. Of course, the rumor has been Trump is planning to declare victory if he has any path to possible victory tonight, even if he hasn't won. Asked about it, Trump says, I will declare victory when there's victory. Sounds like he has a frog in his throat, sounds down, sounds depressed, sounds sort of resigned.
So, Mr. President, the analysis of what they're talking about and some of the things you've said, they are suggesting that you may declare victory if the early numbers favor you. At what point will you declare victory?
When there's victory. If there's victory, I think we'll have victory. I think the polls are, suppression polls, and I think we'll have victory, but only when there's victory. I mean, there's no reason to play games. And I think we'll have victory. I think I look at it as being a very a very solid chance at winning here. I don't know what the chances are. I don't know how they rate the chances, but I think we have a very solid chance of winning.
So many people heard that and thought, oh, that's reassuring, right? He will only declare victory when there's victory. The problem with Trump is He believes he will win, period. And what happens if the numbers don't support that position? At this point, it's not even worth speculating. We will know soon. Let's just wait and see. Trump at one point saying it's been a great run, which for a moment sounded almost like a farewell tour. And we've been seeing this now for the last 5 or 6 days, which is Trump still insists we will win. We're ahead everywhere, that there aren't suppression polls. We're winning everywhere. But then he'll have these 5, 10, 20-second moments where he sounds almost like he's saying goodbye. This was one of them.
And it's been, it's been a great run.
Then Donald Trump again suggesting that all of these boat owners who support him are a signal that how could he lose? The boaters, the people with boats in Florida's Intercoastal and other places, they love me, and so I will win.
Boats.
Different places, and you've seen the boats. The boats are 6,000 boats in a lake, and we're all going for records.
I mean, listen, when people with boats support you, how can you lose, right? Well, let's see. Then Fox and Friends host Ainsley Earhardt sets Trump up by talking about how mean everybody is to him. This is one of the 3 major cable news networks interviewing a president with a record of 20,000 lies and absolute immoral, negligent mishandling of a 100-year global pandemic. And Ainsley Earhardt says, Mr. President, talk about how they're mean to you. This is how they do it. Take a look.
And when they say that they love you, and when they say they love you, I like how you say, well, I love you too. Because when you love someone, that's always nice to hear back. But what has it been like? Have you loved the job, or has it been worth it because you've been under so much attack?
Well, it's been mean. It's been, you've dealt with horrible people like Shifty Schiff and Crazy Nancy and Crying Chuck Schumer. You deal with some horrible people.
Really hard-hitting stuff, huh? It's shocking Trump was even able to answer these questions. Then this was just a weird moment. Donald Trump bizarrely claimed that the United States is more difficult to deal with than Russia or North Korea, almost as if the U.S. is a foreign country he's dealing with. I don't know how to make heads or tails out of this. It's just a weird thing to say. Take a look.
But you deal with people that are very deceptive, but they'll go, Mr. President, tell me, who's the country that's most difficult to deal with? Is it Russia? Is it China? Is it North Korea? Sir, is it North Korea? And I go, no, well, by far, the most difficult country to deal with is the U.S. It's not even close.
Yeah, just a really strange direction. And then this is maybe my favorite moment from the entire interview. Donald Trump attacks Fox News while on Fox News and says, Fox changed. Fox has been airing Biden's speeches lately. And it's a beautiful moment. It's a poetic moment because Fox News ends up having to defend itself to the president. It's just a great moment. Take a look. If this is the end for Trump, this is just a great moment to go out on.
You've said on the stump before, right, Mr. President, I know you've said on the stump before, I wouldn't have gotten into this job or ran for this job if the previous administration wasn't, in your words, so bad. And some have said that Barack Obama's come out to be the bad cop, to go after you. One of the things he said last night was he's going around spreading COVID like he's a carrier because he cares more about having these big crowds than he does keeping people safe. Do you want to respond to the former president?
Well, fortunately, he's drawing flies. He's not getting anybody to go listen to him too much. Actually, Fox puts him on more than anybody else, which is sort of shocking to me because Fox has changed a lot. And somebody said, what's the biggest difference between this and 4 years ago? And I say Fox. It's much different. You still have great people.
But
you're 3 of them.
But Mr. President, can I just say one thing? What they try to do with Fox
in terms of
but
politics.
we just want to show both. Unlike the other networks, they were trying to show both sides. So, hey, here's President Trump live. Here's Joe Biden live. Because we feel it's a responsibility to sell.
We report, they decide.
Yeah,
right.
So I don't think it's an endorsement of anybody.
When Fox News hosts have to explain to the president that, we have to acknowledge that you have an opponent and we have to mention that your opponent is campaigning, It's not an endorsement. You know, things have gotten really bad in the country when that's something that the president has to be explained like a little kid. And then a final closing message from Trump, a moment of unity and of bringing people together. Trump says it would be terrible for women, for Kamala Harris to be the vice president of the United States.
Shots, and if he does, he's not going to be there very long. He's got a vice president who's further left than Bernie Sanders, who is not a particularly good person. And she would be, I think, a terrible first representative if she became the first woman president. I think it would be a terrible thing for our country. I think it would be a terrible thing for women.
So there it is, Donald Trump's last pre-election call into Fox and Friends. And hopefully any future calls will be as lame duck, but we have to make it happen tonight. I will be live, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, starting moments before the 7 p.m. results come in. Don't miss it. Join me then just short of 7 p.m. Eastern time. Very big night ahead of us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, everybody, let's really hope that these are the final Trump rally clips that I will ever be bringing you. Now, we are in the final stretch. Donald Trump did rallies yesterday in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The election is today, but there have been rumors that Trump is looking at continuing to do rallies later this week if the results aren't yet final. But let's hope that doesn't happen, and let's hope these are the last rallies ever. Let's look at a few clips, just a smattering of the tone and tenor of the last day of the campaign for Donald Trump. Donald Trump shouting out musician Ted Nugent, who previously threatened to kill Barack Obama and predicted that by April of, was it 2014? By April of 2013, if Obama won in 2012, Nugent would be dead or in jail. Neither was true. Here's Trump shouting him out.
Ted Nugent, and he is great. Where's Ted? Great job, Ted. He's been from day one, right, Ted? Great job. Thank you very much for everything. We appreciate it. I love your sound. I love your music. And speaking of sound,
Donald Trump then threatening while in the state of Michigan to never return to the state of Michigan if he loses today.
Thank you very much. Look, you can't let this happen to our country, okay? We know what's going on. You can't let this. This was a total fluke. This was a total fluke. In prime time, he didn't work, and now it's really not working. What a disaster. I can't believe this is even happening. It puts much more pressure on me running against a guy like this, you know? If you lost to somebody that was good, can you imagine if the concept of losing to this guy? Oh, you better get out there and vote tomorrow. I will be so angry. I'll never come back to Michigan. I'll never come back.
Interesting tone, sort of more of a grievance tone than a powerful tone. Trump here telling the crowd, you're so lucky that I agreed to be the president of the United States. Humble, right?
You are so lucky I've agreed to be your president. Go out and vote for Trump.
And then Donald Trump describing himself as maybe the most innocent person in the history of the United States.
They were vicious, they were smart. If they could find any little morsel, and they went over taxes, and they went over everything you can go over. They spent $48 million, 2.5 years, the Mueller investigation scam, and they come up, no collusion. There's no collusion after all of that, which makes me perhaps the most innocent man anywhere in the history of the United States.
Now, this actually relates to our next topic today, Trump's innocence, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's continue. Donald Trump then making the case, just saying that Joe Biden is against God.
He's against oil. Oil isn't good. If you're against oil, I don't think it's good. That's not good politics, right, Texas? And he's against God.
Now, I've mentioned this before. I don't care about religiosity when I look at a candidate, them being religious or not. What I care about is policy. I don't need a religious candidate not being someone religious myself. It just so happens that Joe Biden is actually the religious candidate here. Donald Trump claiming to have found religion when he decided to run for president. Joe Biden actually is a devout Catholic. It doesn't make Joe Biden appeal to me anymore, but that's the reality. The glitches keep coming. Just one here, Trump trying to say corrupt glitches and says corrupt, and then you see that spasm.
In 2016, Wisconsin voted to fire this corrupt, and really it's like corrupt political establishment, right? And you elected an outsider as president.
And then, of course, Donald Trump continuing to promise that the coronavirus vaccine will be available. Now it's a couple of weeks. Now, unfortunately, the fact that Trump says a couple of weeks makes me think it could be months. But recall that Donald Trump said we would have 100 million doses of the vaccine by the end of October of this year. It's now November. Donald Trump also promising in July and August that we were 2 weeks away from him signing a new health care bill into law. Neither has happened. Take a listen to this.
This election is also a choice between a deadly Biden lockdown or a safe vaccine. The vaccine is coming along great. Couple of weeks. It's going to be out soon. That ends the pandemic. And it will end anyway. They hate it when I say we're rounding the corner. It's going to end anyway, but the vaccine will make it go a lot quicker. And what we've done with therapeutics is incredible.
And then this next one I love. This is at a different rally. Trump attempting to talk about Beyonce and Jay-Z. He says, now I'm confusing myself because of Trump's glitch. Trying to talk about Beyonce and Jay-Z, Trump talks about Beyonce, which I just love.
They got Beyonce and they got Jay-Z, right? Jay-Z. And he started using the F word, do you remember, in front of this crowd? And it was unbelievable. He was using the F word. And the crowd is going.
You can't use that F word, guys. That I mean, Trump uses it, of course, but when rappers use it, when R&B artists use it, it's very, very bad. And then here's Trump without any indication that he recognizes how stupid what he's saying is. He says Republicans are disadvantaged by the Electoral College.
We're going to get New Hampshire. Yeah, they say get New York. Can you believe that? See the disadvantage we have, because I think in certain ways you campaign totally differently. The disadvantage we have with the Electoral College, you automatically lose. I don't care if you bring back Abraham Lincoln and George Washington as his running mate. You lose New York, Illinois, and California.
Now, as I'm sure you know, were it not for the Electoral College, we would have had fewer Republican presidents. Many Republican candidates have been bailed out by the Electoral College. Then Trump will say, well, with a national popular vote, we'd run a different campaign. OK, but that's a totally different argument. And then the last moment, it's November of 2020. Donald Trump is still talking about Hillary Clinton as his followers yell, lock her up.
34 states against a crooked person, right? A very crooked person. How crooked is Hillary? She deleted 33,000 emails. What's happening with that? But we won like nobody's ever run. Nobody's ever won like we've won. No, the likes of which nobody's ever.
We must end this. We have to stop this. And part of why Donald Trump is behaving this way is that he's scared. Let's talk about that next. As if we needed to up the stakes in today's election, as if the country's future wasn't already riding on this election, we have another wrinkle. New report by the New York Times, as well as by Bess Levin in Vanity Fair, reveals that Donald Trump is not just looking to win because he's a narcissistic egomaniac. He's also reportedly terrified about going to prison if he loses today's election. This is not just based on existing investigations, but on potential new ones he expects. Quote from the New York Times article, seldom far from Trump's thoughts is the possibility of defeat and the potential consequences of being ejected from the White House. In unguarded moments, Trump has for weeks told advisors he expects to face intensifying scrutiny from prosecutors if he loses. He is concerned not only about existing investigations in New York, but the potential for new federal probes as well, according to people who have spoken with him. The New Yorker's Jane Mayer has similar reporting. She writes, quote, Trump's legal expenses alone are likely to be daunting. By the time Bill Clinton left the White House, he'd racked up more than $10 million in legal fees. And Trump's finances are already under growing strain. During the next 4 years, according to a stunning recent Times report, Trump, whether reelected or not, must meet payment deadlines for more than $300 million in loans that he has personally guaranteed. Much of his debt is owed to such foreign creditors as Deutsche Bank. Unless he can refinance with the lenders, he will be on the hook. Cornered animals become desperate. Donald Trump is very cornered right now. One of the reasons he's desperate to win is the concern about being prosecuted. Now, also fascinatingly from the New York Times piece, Donald Trump has people around him telling him he's definitely going to win tonight. Listen to this. Quote, the president, his associates say, has drawn encouragement from his larger audiences and from a stream of relatively upbeat polling information that advisors have curated for him, typically filtering out the bleakest numbers. On a trip to Florida last week, several aides told the president that winning the Electoral College was a certainty, a prognosis not supported by Republican or Democratic polling. Mark Meadows, chief of staff, has responded with chipper enthusiasm when Trump raised the idea of making a late bid for solidly Democratic states like New Mexico, an option other aides have told the president is flatly unrealistic. This is important because when Trump says he's winning everything at his rallies, if people around Trump are actually telling him, you've got this, you've got the Electoral College, if he doesn't win it, he will definitely think it was rigged. If you're thinking I'm down 7, but maybe I can pull this off, if you don't win, you sort of are expecting it. If everybody around you is saying you're going to win the Electoral College and you don't, you react very differently, and you probably do all the things we're worried Donald Trump is going to do. Now, fortunately or unfortunately for Trump versus for the country does not have a history of prosecuting past presidents. That suggests Trump doesn't need to worry. But past presidents also haven't had this level of corruption in their past, so it could change. If everything that should be investigated is investigated whenever the time comes, the Trump family would likely be tied up in court for a long time. To be perfectly frank, probably through the rest of Donald Trump's life. Trump being prosecuted would be a tremendously lovely ending, but Trump out of office is the goal right now. We have the opportunity to do it today. And I hope you'll join me tonight. I will be streaming live starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific as the results start coming in on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Do not miss it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a very interesting question about guns, which relates to a conversation I've been having lately with many friends of mine. Take a listen to this.
Hello, David. This is Antoine from Illinois. And I was curious to know as whether or not your stance on guns have changed as a result of the impending violence being encouraged by the Trump administration. Thank you. I hope you have another one.
My position on the laws around guns has not changed because of these lunatic armed Trumpists. I still have the exact same position I always have about background checks, high capacity magazines, regulation. None of that has changed. Where I have been having some conversations with fellow progressive friends of mine is, do we really want them to be the ones with all the guns? And as we now are on not even the eve, on the day of potential armed violence in the streets, I have many friends, including super progressive people in very blue states who have the same views as I do on gun control, on gun safety regulations, who have acquired firearms. Now, I got a question the other day via Super Chat during a live stream about whether I have firearms. And I said, I don't talk about, there's no advantage to me talking about that. And so that's not something I talk about. But there is no question that when we think about how far are they willing to go if Trump claims that it was rigged and that he really won, even though Joe Biden is maybe going to win, I don't love the idea of the right being the ones with all the guns. Now, at the same time, if I carry that forward to its logical conclusions, what am I saying? I'm saying, well, in a shootout situation with armed Trumpists, I also want to have guns to participate in the shootout. I mean, it's a crazy dystopian, dark path you start going down, but this is not something that has eluded many of my ultra progressive friends, and maybe a topic for after the election. On today's bonus show, more on today's election. What does producer Pat's electoral map look like compared to mine? Number 2. Election day is becoming, in a sense, a judgment day for social media. We will talk about how and why. And lastly, it's not just the White House. It's not just the Senate and the House of Representatives tonight. There are also local elections, but importantly, local ballot initiatives. We will talk about that and so much more. This is it. This is it. It's election day. Thanks to everybody who has been following. Increasingly, our podcast audience has doubled over the last 4 months. The YouTube channel has exploded. Twitch, Facebook. Facebook is now bigger than YouTube was 9 months ago, if you can believe that. It's crazy. Thanks to everybody. Let's hope that today is the big reset and that tomorrow we start with the ship marginally pointed in a better direction. Bonus show. Get the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpacman.com. See you at 7 p.m. Eastern tonight.